say is state-sponsored violence unleashed on innocent civilians during last week's by-election at Ayawaso West, Wogon. MFA Nancy Joadosi is on the line, and she is currently with the demonstrators. Good morning, MFA.
Good morning, Daniel.
Yes, I can tell it's very lively where you are. What is happening now with the demonstration?
All right, Daniel. I can say that lots of people, scores of people have gathered here this morning and to participate in this demonstration. Now, for what began as just one person, the numbers kept on increasing. And as it stands, over 100 people, I can say, are here. The General Secretary of the NDC just got here. Who just got here. I'll be speaking to some of them. And basically, what they've been saying is that at the end of this march, they want to see the IGP, they want to see Brian Echampo start. Now, Bernard Warner, who is the convener for this particular group, tells me that if this is not done, they intend staging this demonstration in other regions, because that is all they want to see. They want to see people get fired because there's so much insecurity in the country, and so they are not stopping now. If you remember, at the beginning, they had some confusion with the police about the route to you. It appears they finally reached an agreement, and so from here, from the brass spot here in a circle, we are first going to the Interior Ministry, and where they will submit a petition, then to the police headquarters, and then they'll also go to the Flagstaff House. They're expecting that the Vice President, Dr. Mahmoud Bamia, will be there to receive their petition, Daniel.
Now, MFA, yesterday we saw government appoint a commission of inquiry to look into this matter. Are these people aware? What is their reaction to the recent action?
So, I think reaction first from Bernard Warner. Bernard Warner describes the commission as a charade because he thinks that it is just a charade for the government to not do anything about the matter. He says that they know that Brian Echampo, as he has already admitted, said he sends people to go and diffuse certain elements. And so if Brian Echampo has owned up, there's no need for the commission. So he thinks that the commission set up by Nanado is just a charade. Also, General Secretary of the NDC, Johnson Asiedu Kesi, also described it as a fake commission. He says the government is just putting people who they know are NDC supporters into the commission, and that they will resist any attempt. They know that the commission will come out with nothing in their report, and so they are just waiting, but they know that nothing better is going to happen. They only know that Brian Champong and the IGP must be fired, and that is all they are calling for.
Thanks, MFA Joadosi, for that report. We'll come back to you during the day to get more updates on that demonstration. So MFA Nancy Joadosi is currently at the Obra spot near Circle here in Accra, not too far from where we are sitting at Kokomlemle, and she is with the demonstration which has been called by opposition political parties. Now, you heard her quote Bernard Warner and Johnson Esiedun Ketia, chairman of the PNC and the General Secretary of the NDC, respectively, and they both made reference to this interview that, or this statement that was made by Brian Echampo, Minister of State in charge of national security.
We had an election task force made up of police, national security, immigration, customs, prison, and we deployed to all the homes of the aspirants, the parliamentary candidates. So that information is not true.
Okay. All right. So is there any reason for this, or this is protocol? You deployed to all their homes?
It's standard protocol. We need to protect every parliamentary candidate.
Okay. But was there some specific assignment for? Was there some intelligence leading to some specific assignment which got out of hand?
It is standard protocol that when you have an election like this, you assign security personnel to the parliamentary candidate or parliamentary or presidential candidate. It's a standard security protocol that we adhere to. In addition to that, we also receive intelligence information about some stuff, movements here and there, that we track, we trace, and then we neutralize. And that information I may not comfortable sharing on air.
I see. So the men who died fully armed in the buckets of the vehicles that we saw, they are not they are not guards for the MPs. They were for the special assignment on the intelligence you spoke about, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So were they successful in their assignments?
Because it's under active investigation, what the information we have goes beyond the by-election that we just witnessed. It's a massive operation of movement of certain things that is undesirable to the public.
Okay.
And it's something that the operation or the information that we have, what we are tracking, has not ended. I mean, as we speak now, our men are actively engaged in unraveling the thing that we suspect it is. So it has not ended. When it ends and we deem it fit to apprise the public of that information, we will.
Okay, so if I could get you clearly, your men are still at the home which was suspected to hold arms and ammunition, and when they are done, you will inform us if it is necessary?
I did not say that. I said we are we are conducting a major investigation for the public good.
Okay.
It started before the by-election. The by-election day, there were some things that we followed up. Even today and yesterday, we're still that investigation is still ongoing. When it is complete and they are successful, the public will have to know. We will apprise the public.
And that is Brian Champong. He's the Minister of State in charge of national security. You're still live on the Super Morning Show on Joy 99.7 FM. Now, yesterday on Newsnight, we had lawyer John Ndebugri refer to the statement that has been made by Mr. Brian Champong and use it as basis to sort of say the Commission of Enquiry that has been appointed, has been set up by the presidency to look into this matter is not necessary because of these very statements that Brian Champong has made. Let's listen to Mr. Ndebugri.
I think that this business of Commission of Enquiry has taken me really by surprise because, I mean, those who committed the acts are known. They should be apprehended. They should be taken through the due process of investigation and charged before a court of competent jurisdiction and prosecuted. So I don't see the point in the Commission of Enquiry. In fact, it is a way of virtually sweeping matters under the carpet. Because, as you have rightly said, past experience shows that after the report has been submitted, really, we are not likely to have any serious effect. The people are known. Some persons have come publicly and said that they are the ones who deployed them. So those persons must be made to produce those persons they deployed. And we have various footages. They can be identified and they should be dealt with in the normal course of business. I don't see how a Commission of Enquiry fits into this matter. What they did was simple criminal acts. They committed simple criminal acts and they can easily be identified. So I don't see the need of a Commission of Enquiry. With the greatest respect, that is my humble view.
The IGP yesterday issued a statement, in fact, saying that they're expanding the criminal investigations into this matter and told us for the first time who is part of that probe in terms of the committee. And I asked that same question of your president just before you came on. Which of these two bodies would you give precedence in terms of looking into this matter, the IGP's criminal probe or this one?
I will give precedence to the IGP's probe. I don't want to call the IGP's decision or what he intends to do a probe. A probe? No, an investigation, straightforward investigation. People have committed crimes, so they should be apprehended, granted bail, investigations will go through, and they will be charged and prosecuted. That is the end of it. The President of the Republic has established a Commission of Enquiry. the IGP, an appointee of the President of the Republic, is also carrying out some investigation. What is the meaning of that? I mean, I think that with the greatest respect, this question of Commission of Enquiry, in my very humble view, is a non-starter. It is not going to lead to anything. Not just because previous commissions of inquiry have turned up nothing serious, but because in this particular case, it is a very simple matter of criminal acts committed by individuals who can easily be identified. And in fact, who should be identified by persons, public officers, who have come out and said that they deployed them. And so, I mean, what is the Commission of Inquiry supposed to do? I have not seen the terms of reference. I don't know whether they are to determine whether the acts they committed were officially sanctioned or they were acts of their own.
And that was John in Debugri. Now, Mr. Bombandi, however, who is a former founder and executive director for West African Network for Peace Building, however, lauds the formation of the commission.
So I think that brings in a certain level of confidence. But let me then quickly add that it's not just about the individuals, but it's the establishment of the credibility, as I talked about, and the mechanism that we can trust again our security coordination. And the third point I wanted to make is that there is no problem you should leave at the surface level without appreciating the structure.
Okay.
That beyond, and that is what I understand by incidental and reasonably related matters that will be arising.
Yeah.
That it doesn't matter what our commissioners would do to address this problem, we need to go beneath and take it from the root, which is vigilantism, political vigilantism. We are all shocked and awoken by the violence of Ayawasu, West Wogon. But when I followed it and I was not, I've been traveling, I've been trying to recover, I just got back. The first thing that hit me was, are you surprised?
Okay.
This has been coming. The problem is we refuse to appreciate that there is a constant accumulation each time the violence occurred by these rampaging vigilante groups. We had a way of dismissing it. Now this Ayawaso West Wogon hit us badly. Yeah. But you know what? For those who refuse to understand the psychology of violence and what it has the potential and the capacity to do, this could be nothing compared to what could still happen.
Okay.
So the commission also has a certain value to it, that what we cannot immediately describe because it has not yet happened. In the same way, we could not have described Ayawaso West Wogon because it hadn't happened. And so something else that can happen that we cannot describe could be probably 5 times the magnitude of this, and later on 10 times the magnitude. So the commission also has to be the final point of saying, people, let's go back and let's reason again.
Emmanuel Bombandi is the founder and former executive director for the West African Network for Peace Building, WANEP. We've been joined on the line by the Minister for Information, Kojo Oponkroma. Good morning, Mr. Oponkroma. Thanks for your time.
Good morning, Mr. Dazi. Thanks for having me.
I'm reading an excerpt from the statements that President Akufo-Addo released on some 6 days ago, after Madam Lydia Sarah Al-Hassan was declared winner for the by-election. And it says, the police is committed to conducting a rapid inquiry into the matter, and I expect all persons who are found culpable at the end of the process to face the full rigors of the law. In light of the President making this statement, why are we setting up a commission of inquiry?
Because events subsequent to that day suggest that we need a broader, higher level of inquiry that, first of all, deals with this particular matter, and secondly, gives us an opportunity to deal with the entire subject of violence associated with elections and with by-elections in particular, comprehensively. So the investigation of the police, or the subject of the investigation of the police, is not lost in the broader investigation, which will even go beyond that. If you look at the terms of reference of the constitutional instrument that was signed and gazetted yesterday, it has a broader scope than the specific police investigation. So the objective of that police investigation is still achieved. And in addition to that, some more objectives are achieved with the Presidential Commission of Enquiry.
Okay, so the terms of reference are to make a full, faithful, and impartial inquiry into the circumstances of and establish the facts leading to the events associated violence during the Ayawaso West Wogon by-election. As the first one. Number 2 is to identify any person responsible for or who has been involved in the events associated violence and injuries. And number 3 is to inquire into any matter which the Commission considers incidental or reasonably related to the causes of the events and the associated violence and injuries. So we can say, for instance, that on the third point, if you're looking at the cause of these events, it may spread beyond this particular one. But largely, this Commission of Enquiry, from the terms of reference I just read, seems to focus largely on the Ayawaso West Wogon violence from last week.
That is so. And as I mentioned earlier to you, beyond that specific matter, I mean, yes, there is a possibility of crime, there's a possibility of excessive force, there are possible criminal matters that would have been the subject of the small police investigation. Those ones are included in this one. But beyond that, this is also a peculiar matter of electoral violence or alleged electoral violence or violence associated with, in particular, by-elections. It is also important to get a body of knowledge on that subject. This is not the first time that we've had violence associated with an election or with a by-election. Throughout this week, as I've followed your conversation, I've heard people refer to Talensi, to Treponi, to Etiwa, to Akwetia, and people express the worry that it is also important to deal with the subject matter as we head towards 2020. Indeed, I heard you allude to that, I think on Tuesday morning or so. So in addition to the specific potential criminal or law enforcement investigations that need to happen, the bigger subject matter, and that's why you notice that if you are looking at the actual CI, I think it's section 6.1, I beg your pardon, section 2C, that would also go into matters beyond the specific so that we can, at the end of it all, get recommendations. A police investigation will not necessarily give you recommendations on how to deal with these matters moving on. It will not necessarily be the platform to get institutional action on how to better handle these situations. So you achieve that linear objective in this inquiry, and you achieve more as well as a result of this inquiry.
Okay, during the investigations that Shraj carried out into the bond issuance by the Finance Ministry, of course, there was a specific allegation to Mr. Ken Ofori-Atta. In the aftermath, when issues were raised about the declaration of assets, issues were Mr. Ofori-Atta went to court and he said that was not within the terms of reference or within the remit of the Shraj investigation. So if we are to make a stretch and it's not specifically mentioned in the terms of reference, are we not putting the Commission of Enquiry in a certain position? Because Talensi is not mentioned here. None of the previous by-elections are mentioned here. So isn't the Commission of Enquiry enjoined to stick strictly to their terms of reference?
They are enjoined to stick strictly to the terms of reference. You are correct. And the terms of reference in section 3C says to inquire into any matter which the Commission considers incidental or reasonably related to the cause of the events and the associated violence and injuries. That is a matter for the Commission to determine. That issue of reasonable proximity or reasonable relation is a matter for the Commission to determine. So, for example, if you, Daniel Dazi, was of the opinion that Talensi had a connection with what happened here, I would imagine what you would do would be to petition the Commission to look into it or to send a memorandum to the Commission that you think that this matter should also be looked into as part of this one. I'm following your example that you are giving me, and the Commission will have to make a determination as to whether or not that matter is reasonably related to the cause of the event and proceed to work based on their determination. Indeed, even if it was a court only that was sitting and a party felt that a matter ought to be brought into it, that party is allowed to file an amicus curiae brief or to file a joinder motion and even seek to make a submission to, even if it is a court. So the spirit of what will be achieved here doesn't change, whether it's a court or it's a commission of inquiry. In that sense, that is in the sense of somebody feeling that a matter is reasonably related or will be affected and making an application to this commission. That person is allowed so to do.
Now, a legal opinion has been expressed that taking the precedent of Mr. Kojo Mpieni going to court after the Commission of Enquiry then spoke to him, it may be difficult to prosecute persons whom the Commission thinks should be prosecuted.
I would differ with that opinion. As you mentioned, it is one legal opinion. There will be other opinions. These opinions may be adjudicated upon by a court. Even that court's position may be reviewed by a higher court in the case of judicial review. But the reason for which I differ with that opinion, and I've heard other very senior lawyers who differ with that opinion, is twofold. Number one, in that particular instance, the constitutional instrument that set it up provided immunity from prosecution for the witnesses before that commission. Daniel, I don't know if you've seen a copy of the constitutional instrument for this particular commission. Have you?
Not
Hello,
yet. Not yet. Not
Yes.
yet. So has it been issued?
Yes, it's been issued and gazetted. You will not
Right.
find
When was it issued, Mr. Ponkoro?
Yesterday.
Yesterday. Right. Right.
So it was subsequent to its issuance that the statement was put out from the presidency.
Oh.
But I'm saying that, therefore, if you look into this this year, you will not find that same element of immunity from prosecution. That was number one. Number two, again, if you read that particular case, I think it's the Republic versus Kojo Mpieni and Charles Wekudodo, or the Ghana 50 case as is described by some.
Yeah.
If you read the trial judge, Justice Mafusau, I think he was an appeal court judge sitting as an additional high court judge, makes the point that when you, among other things, just pick the Commission of Enquiry report and seek to prosecute based on it, what it means is that you have appropriated evidence while stripping of the witnesses or stripping them of their normal defense rights. And that body of evidence which you have appropriated in the Commission of Enquiry report cannot then be tabled simpliciter before a court as evidence to secure conviction. It is the combination of these two matters that come to that conclusion that, therefore, those specific persons could not be subjects of prosecutorial action after, one, the CI gave them immunity, and two, the prosecution sought to just dump the CI report in court and say they are prosecuting based on that. Therefore, what it means is that if you have an instance in which you don't have that immunity, you have an instance in which you have a proper body of evidence separated from what the Commission of Enquiry, because the Commission of Enquiry is going to be doing its own fact-finding and its own recommendation. And if a commission, for example, says that X person committed Y act, which in their view amounts to a breach of the law, the prosecutorial authorities, if they intend to prosecute, would have to pick their evidence properly, put together a proper docket, and proceed to do a prosecution based on that one. So I think that the two matters are not on all fours.
Right. Now, with this issue of commissions of inquiry, we have picked up a sentiment that has been expressed repeatedly that, again, we have seen commissions of inquiry in the past. I mean, regardless of these specific terms in this constitutional instruments you refer to, which would enable someone to prepare a docket from this particular commission's finding. But then again, we have seen commissions of inquiry in the past, and the effects and the impact of the committees or the commission's findings have not been felt by the average Ghanaian. The real change that the average Ghanaian is looking for was not seen on the ground. What will be different this time around?
What is this real change, by the way?
Of course, they differ in various commissions and in various circumstances. We can't go through them individually, but there are specific reasons, and I'm sure the real change that most Ghanaians have called for, and you can look at the statements that have been released with this case of Ayawaso West Wogon, is prosecutions of persons who are found guilty.
If you read section, I think it's section Section 3C of the Section 3D of the CI that was issued and gazetted yesterday. It talks about sanctions, appropriate sanctions. So in this instance, if the appropriate sanctions are prosecutorial action, I'm pretty sure that this commission will make those recommendations. If the appropriate sanctions are other than prosecutions, depending on who that person is, I'm sure that they'll make those necessary recommendations. What you need to do is to pick, and I like the point you made, that each one of them, may differ. But you say it may not be possible to go into all of that. That is exactly what we have to do. You pick every commission of inquiry, you pick the terms of reference specifically, you pick the objective, and then you measure, and you ask yourself whether or not that has been achieved. And in this instance, the objectives of the terms of reference are pretty simple and specific. And I think everybody, the entire world, the international community, the Ghanaian community, political parties, civil society organizations, the media, you will all be following. And you will all be able to, I think, have an opportunity to see the final report of the commission and the recommended sanctions that are put at the end of it. I think one of the important things to recognize is that this is not the first time we have had elections with violence associated in Ghana. In fact, this is not the first time we've had by-elections with violence associated, but this gives an opportunity, and that's the president's, may I say, motive. This gives an opportunity to, beyond dealing with the specific matter and holding persons accountable for this specific matter, this also gives an opportunity to understand the broader subject and to come up with the body of knowledge or recommendations that helps us to end this practice once and for all.
Okay, Mr. Oponkuma, for the sake of this discussion, let me make a few references and examples so that we can have a clearer picture or a clearer sense of what the question really is. We've had the Appeal Commission on Judgment's Debt. We've had the Jamepe Commission on the Brazil fiasco. And there has been, of course, the Constitution Review Commission on the Constitution Review. And one would ask, what has come out of them? What is the useful effect?
Again, I make the point that you have to go to the specific objects, because every commission of inquiry has specific terms of reference. In fact, if you look at this CI specifically, it is, let me just read it for you. It's a commission of inquiry into brackets Ayawaso West Wogomba elections events instrument of 2019. It is specific with specific terms of reference. So to answer your question, what you need to do is to measure the specific objectives of each of these ones you are talking about with the outcome. And that is why it is also possible for the general public to even look at the outcome and say, if we look at the objectives that were set for us, for example, if you take the Brazil matter, or if you take the judgment debt matter, if we look at the specific and we look at the recommendations that were made at the end of the day, and we measure or we compare to today, are those recommendations necessarily being followed? In the Brazil matter, for example, there were recommendations about how state funds for payment of sports allowances, etc., should be happened. You can measure and ask yourself whether those institutional remedies have taken place. So again, I make the point that you have to compare every specific commission of inquiry and its specific terms of reference to the outcome. In this instance, as I've mentioned to you, it's about fourfold. Is to make a faithful, full, impartial inquiry to the circumstances and to gather the facts. It is to identify the persons responsible who have been involved in the events associated violence and injuries. Is to inquire into any matter which the Commission considers incidental or reasonably related. And is to make a report including appropriate sanctions, if any. These are the specifics. So in this instance, you will measure the outcome with these specifics. And I think the good point you were making earlier is that the earlier criminal or police investigation is not lost in this one. I would suspect, or I would imagine, that the police themselves will be invited to provide some of the factors. They have it, and all of that will form part of the body of evidence before this commission and will feed into the recommendations. If you take the May 9th disaster, the Okujeto Commission that was established by President Kufuor, it had specific terms of reference. Part of which included, for example, security arrangements on different classes of football games in this country, which it is my understanding are being followed today. So let's not make the sweeping statement that commissions of inquiry don't lead to anything. No, let's pick the specific, measure the specific terms of reference and objective, and look out for what has transpired afterwards.
There's a reason for that statement, Mr. Oponkoma, and I'll point you to that in just a moment. But it's just a point of curiosity that in the statement that was released yesterday, reference was not made to the constitutional instrument which was used to set up this commission to enable more elucidation on the matter. But on the points that I raised, as in the commissions of inquiry and their effectiveness, the Jamipe Commission is a typical example where you yourself made an example of where recommendations were made as to how money should be transported or money should be paid out to players who play for Ghana. The question here is that it becomes then the discretion of the government and the discretion of the implementing agency to carry out this matter or not. Weeks after the Jamipe, or shortly after that recommendation was made, we saw monies being flown out to players again. So the question here is that, are we not then leaving government with that, carte blanche to decide to implement a recommendation or not? Well, as compared to a court process which would have a strict sanction attached to it, which by law persons other than government are required to carry out?
So about three answers to that question. First of all, the fact that one political administration at a point in time did not necessarily respect the recommendation does not mean that forever that has been the case. It is my understanding and my knowledge that today that aspect of the Commission's report is being implemented. You can check from the sports minister that today we don't fly out cash to follow players elsewhere. So the fact that, for example, the NDC administration did not do that does not mean that forever any other administration will refuse to follow what appears to be a very logical recommendation by the Commission. It's about leadership and it's about focus. The next point I'd like to make, based on your question, is that even a court order is subject to judicial review. If an administration is of the view that a court order, so you are suggesting that assuming it was a matter before the court, then what the court say in the end is final. No, what the court say in the end is not final. It is subject to review at the higher appellate court if indeed the other party or the government or somebody disagrees with what the court has said.
Well, on that point, Mr. Oponkoma, just because you referred to what I said, I did not limit it to a single cause procedure. I was referring to the judiciary as an institution, so that when it gets to a final conclusion within the judiciary, then it becomes a binding decision.
That is a fair point, but that is why I'm also saying that, therefore, at various stages, because people assume that, for example, assuming in this instance, there are criminal matters that are taken to the High Court, when the court has made a pronouncement on it, that is the end. No, that is not the end. If somebody disagrees with that, he may go to the Court of Appeals, he may go to the Supreme Court, he may go to the review bench of the Supreme Court. So I'm just saying that that is not even cast in stone. The third thing is that there are also sanctions under a commission of inquiry. There are sanctions under a commission of inquiry. Indeed, if you read the case, the Republic versus Kojo Mpini and Charles Wakubobe, Justice Mafusal makes quite clear the argument of the sanctions that apply. And the sanctions may be, twofold. Not all of them may necessarily have incarcerations associated with them. But some of the sanctions may be administrative. Some of them may actually have its own criminal consequences, but not necessarily by virtue of incarceration. Okay, so I hear the various schools of thought raised, but the same constitution that allows the courts to be set up, the same constitution that allows, for example, a police force to be set up, is the same constitution that under Article 278 allows commissions of inquiry. And if you read 279, 280, it spells out the procedures for even enforcing the sanctions, and even still allows an administration to disagree with the Commission of Inquiry. I'm not even saying that anybody is contemplating a disagreement with this Commission of Inquiry. If you look at the names of the persons, these are very highly respected persons who the president is convinced will do a decent job, first about this specific matter, second about the broader subject matter in the interest of the country. But the same constitution even gives, it like in the past, the administration an opportunity to even disagree with the position of the Commission of Inquiry.
Right. Thank you very much, Kojo Oponkoma, for joining us.
Thank you.
He is Minister for Information. He brings us to 17 minutes to the top of the hour here on the Super Morning Show on Joy 99.7 FM. We'll take a few messages, and when we come back...
When I don't have money to buy food for her, she can cry the whole day. Sometimes, to have my peace of mind, I have some drugs I take when I want to sleep for long hours, which I